And I'd like to start out by welcoming everyone once again to the Kansas 4-H Animal Science webinar series. This is our August episode where we are going to cover biosecurity. We know that lots of 4-H families have just finished their county fairs. You may be getting ready to attend the Kansas State Fair or the Kansas Junior Livestock Show. And those of you who are in the beef project are probably looking at starting to visit some farms and think about your projects for the 2023 4-H program year. And so we want to make sure that we set you up for success. With that, I'd like to introduce Kelly Oliver to you. Kelly works with the Kansas Department of Agriculture, and she is going to share with us this evening. If you have any questions as we go, please be sure to put those in the chat. You can also hold on to those to the very end and ask them at the end. We'll do question and answer at the end of the presentation this evening. With that, I'm going to go ahead and mute, and Kelly, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Kelsey. Let me share my screen here with you. Perfect, can you see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for joining this evening. I am Kelly Oliver, and I serve as the Animal Health Planner for the Kansas Department of Agriculture. And we are going to talk about biosecurity tonight. So just to kind of give you a heads up and make you a little more aware of some of the numbers that we have here in Kansas, big picture wise, we have a lot of facilities and we license different operations across the state. So in Kansas, we have about 305 feedlots, 277 commercial swine operations, about 39 dairies, 76 deer operations, 109 poultry operations, 765 small animal facilities, which are your dogs and cat breeders, and also your shelters. And we have about 17,000 registered brands in Kansas. And, there's a lot of other smaller operations out there that didn't quite meet the threshold to be figured up into these numbers. So I just kind of want to give you an idea of what's out there in our state. So Kansas is considered an import and export state, which means we have livestock coming into the state for feeding and slaughtering purposes, and we have livestock going to other states for the same reasons. So many of the states here in the Midwest are considered import and export states based on the location of the packing plants and just how our industries operate. Majority of the livestock in the southeast part, so like around Florida and Georgia, those are all shipped out of their state, so they are strictly considered an export state. So we have about almost 3 million head of cattle coming into Kansas and 2 million head of hogs coming in. And we have about 1 million of each leaving the state. So lots of numbers coming in and going out of our state. Just sharing some inventory numbers for you. These are rough numbers, but it does give you a better idea of, the scope of livestock that we have in our state. So about 6.5 million head of cattle on ranches and in feed yards, with about 6.7 million head processed annually at packing houses. We have about 2 million hogs. 100,000 head of hogs are on the road weekly. About 65,000 head of sheep raised, and 173,000 dairy cows are milked annually. So just sharing with you those numbers to give you an idea of the volume we have here in Kansas. So we here at the Kansas Department of Agriculture, we are so incredibly proud to serve the state's largest industry. And we have, about 50% of the total economy in Kansas is made up by agriculture. We have about 2.9 million people here, and 13% of the Kansas workforce is employed in agriculture. 90% of our land is used in agriculture. There's about 60,000 farms in Kansas, and 60% of the total agricultural revenue, so the money made in Kansas, comes from raising cattle. So we know that Kansas is a powerhouse when it comes to agriculture, and we are so proud of that. But with that comes a great deal of responsibility. So part of our job here at KDA Animal Health is to ensure that every animal that comes into our state is disease-free. If one virus or disease enters and spreads to other animals, that's when we have a problem. And depending on the type of virus it could be, we have a lot to lose. And that is why, I was so excited when Kelsey reached out to me about presenting on biosecurity, because it's something that, it often gets overlooked. We definitely don't talk about it enough, especially in the exhibition world, when so many animals come from different places, they commingle at a show. We just really need to fully understand the risk we're taking and be proactive to keep our livestock safe and healthy. So these are some outbreaks that you've probably heard about in the news. In 2020, we had vesicular stomatitis in primarily horses, but we also saw it in some cattle. We've had West Nile, and this year we've been battling highly pathogenic avian influenza. So I'm sure if any of you out there have some birds at home, you probably have seen our handouts or information on ways to protect your flock from wild birds. We've also had rabbit hemorrhagic disease. And this is one that it's been going around the United States for quite a while, but just in the last month, it made its way to Kansas. And, I share these with you just so you know that they're out there. They're in Kansas. And one of the ones that the United States has been on super high alert for is African swine fever. And you've probably, seen this in the news as well. There's been recent reports of it in the Dominican Republic. It currently is not in the United States, but the United States Department of Agriculture has taken some avenues to help keep it out of the United States. So they have implemented the Beagle Brigade, which are trained dogs that they have implemented in some of our large airports. And these dogs are trained to sniff out the African swine fever virus. So you can see in the pictures all of the pork products that they have found at airports. And because of the way that, this virus spreads, it can be carried through those pork products. And so that's why the USDA has implemented the Beagle Brigade. And typically, on a regular day, the canine teams inspect more than 1 million people, as well as air and sea cargo. So all of the goods that are coming from other countries that are being brought to the US, the Beagle Brigade will go through and make sure that nothing contains the African swine fever virus. So pretty incredible. You can see here, this is just one day's worth of work for that Beagle. And I share this with you just so you know that, this is what the United States is doing as a nationwide approach to biosecurity and what we're trying to do and what we're trying to protect ourselves from. So let's get more in depth on what biosecurity really means and how we can go about, protecting our show stock. So I'm sure, we've all been to a show, we've all came home, you're unpacking the trailer, you're unpacking the show box, you come across something that you just accidentally picked up. It could be a brush, it could be a bucket, maybe a show stick, manure fork, whatever the case might be. We're cleaning up after the county fair and someone left these items behind, so you took them home. This happens all the time, but have you ever thought about what else you might be picking up at the show? Maybe it's a cough, maybe some fungus, ringworm, warts. There's lots of possibilities out there. So we're going to discuss on ways that you can prevent this from happening. So what is biosecurity? Let's start with that. It's kind of a weird word, but biosecurity is defined as practices or procedures that are intended to protect humans or animals against a disease. So think about during maybe cold and flu season at school. I'm sure you are reminded to wash your hands or maybe cover your mouth when you cough or sneeze into your elbow. These are all biosecurity practices that help protect people. So we do similar things to help protect our animals. So biosecurity is a habit, and for it to work properly, it must become a habit, something that you do every day, no matter what. Those practices and procedures that we talk about in the definition of biosecurity are the good habits. Essentially, it is doing everything in your power to reduce the chances of an infectious disease being carried onto your farm, or doing everything in your power to reduce the chances of an infectious disease leaving your farm or show barn. So why do we care about biosecurity? From the industry's perspective, it helps ensure we're keeping animals healthy. It helps prevent diseases from spreading. Unhealthy animals typically don't make you any money. We always want to keep a positive light on the industry and for our consumers and the public. If we have healthy livestock, it helps keep our foreign trade open, which means other countries are buying meat and other livestock products from the United States. And that's a really good thing. That's how we operate as an industry. So from an exhibitor's perspective, disease outbreaks can have a great impact on shows. If you remember back in 2015, all the poultry shows at county fairs and state shows in Kansas were shut down due to highly pathogenic avian influenza. We had that again this year, and fortunately, we didn't have to close down any shows or fairs this year. But it's a possibility. It's always a possibility. You're starting to see more and more vet checks at shows, and that's just to ensure that all the animals there are healthy. I know that going through a vet check line might make you a little bit nervous, but it's just to ensure that every animal that is at the show is healthy enough to be there. If you take your animals to a show and maybe you leave some back at home in the barn, or you have other animals on your property, when you return from the show, you need to ensure that the animals that didn't go aren't picking up something from the animals that did go. Especially, when you're first headed out to your first couple of shows of the season, your animals haven't quite built up their immune system yet. So you might easily pick up a cough or something along the way. It's no different than you. Many of you have just started back at school and you're around new people. You need to give your body a chance to build up some immunity. Now, the next couple of slides that I'm going to share with you, I just want to warn you, they're a little hard to look at, but I share them with you so you have an idea of some of the things that you need to be watching for with your animals. Now, these are more on the severe side, but I certainly think it's helpful to know what we're looking for when it comes to those illnesses. So I'm going to share with you, these pictures are all from the secular stomatitis virus, but I show them in case you're out feeding one night or one morning and you see something that just doesn't quite look right. If you see something, you need to say something. Maybe you notice that your animal didn't clean up all of its feed. Maybe you're noticing it slobbering a lot. These are all things that I think you need to be on the lookout for because it could mean something more. Fungus and ringworm, these are all things that you really got to watch out for and make sure it's all healed up before going to a show. And, these are all the things that these good habits and these biosecurity practices that we'll talk about. If you implement them, that's what you're protecting your livestock from. Now, here is my disclaimer. Sometimes you do all the absolute right things and your animal still gets something. Maybe it's fungus or a cough, and I'm here to tell you that it happens, and that's okay. Maybe you have to miss a show to let things heal up, but I would rather that animal stay at home and get better versus going to a show and spreading it to other animals. So let's just go over kind of ways that things could spread. Viruses spread from something that we call a fomite. So a fomite is an object or an item that carries the virus. It could be your shoes, clippers, something you picked up from the scales or even the wash rack. But one of the top fomites that we see are flies. They land on one animal and bite them, then they go to another animal carrying that blood from the previous animal that they bit and infecting it. So we all have flies in our barn. It is fly season. So it's super important to keep them under control as they are a notorious fomite. But you can see there a list of other things that, could be potential fomites as well. So one of the best habits that you can start doing, and I hope some of you already do that, and that is having designated barn shoes. And this means that those shoes are only worn in your barn, not to your neighbor's barn, not to your friend's barn, not to a sale, only in your barn. When utilizing blankets, make sure your animal is completely dry before putting those on. If their hide is still wet and you cover it with that blanket, you're creating the perfect environment for a fungus to grow. When you have visitors coming by to look at your animals or just want to see what you have going on, have them step into a foot bath or disinfect their shoes before entering your barn. This will help prevent them from carrying something into your barn unintentionally. You're starting to see more and more, especially with the swine industry. When you go to a sale at someone's farm or even go to look at pigs before the sale, the producer will ask you to wear boot covers or step into a foot bath. And that's just to protect their livestock. It's important to throw those boot covers away before leaving so you don't carry anything back to your farm. So some things that we can do before the show, even if it's a jackpot, a spring show, county fair, or even state or even a national show, be sure to read all of the guidelines to make sure you meet the entry and exhibition requirements. If you're going out of state, you should always travel with health papers or a veterinary certificate of veterinary inspection within 30 days. That 30-day time frame needs to cover your trip there and allow you time to get home. You need to evaluate your animal's health prior to leaving. Never, ever take an unhealthy animal to a show. Clean and disinfect all the equipment you plan to take to the show. This goes back to doing everything in your power to reduce the chances of an infectious disease leaving your farm. So during the show, you need to be on high alert for any signs of illness that your animal may present. Avoid touching other animals. I know that sounds very difficult, but just be sure to wash your hands as much as possible when working or touching other people's animals. Do not share buckets. Do not share feed pans or tack or grooming supplies. You just don't know what's been in other people's feed pans or buckets, and so it's just best to avoid using someone else's stuff. And, I know that's really hard because I know every single one of you wants to be helpful. And that's just what an outstanding 4-H'er does. They help others. But it's super important that if you let someone borrow an item to use on their animals, that you properly disinfect it prior to using it on yours. Controlling the general public, this is something that it's a challenge. And whether it's your county fair or state fair, you typically have the general public or people not associated with the livestock show come to the fair to view all of the animals. And this is great. And we want them to come. We want them to see all your hard work, and we want them to learn about production agriculture. However, with this comes a great deal of risk, and you don't know where these people have been. You don't know what other animals they have touched prior to touching yours. They don't always know or understand the risk that they pose, and they will more than likely have never petted a horse or seen a goat. So that's something that they want to do because they're excited to be there. So here's some simple phrases that I'm going to share with you that, you can just politely inform them that you don't want them close to your animal. And usually, I think for the most part, they'll respect you and follow your direction. And if they don't, it's perfectly acceptable to ask them or ask a show manager to come visit with them. So it's simply to say, please do not touch my animal. My animal is on a strict diet. Please do not feed it. I am happy to answer any questions for you, but please just step back and give my animal some room. These are all perfectly acceptable. And for the most part, I think they would follow your instructions just fine. So prior to loading everything up and leaving the show, you should wash everything from the feed pans to the brushes to the animals. When it comes to biosecurity, you can never be too careful. This goes back to doing everything in your power to reduce the chances of an infectious disease being carried onto your farm. So wash everything prior to leaving. Now, once you've arrived back at your barn, you should isolate those animals that went to the show from the ones that didn't. I know that with some facilities, this is not doable, but at a very minimum, let's limit nose-to-nose contact. That should not be possible. You should also think about your chore routine. You should always feed and care for the animals that did not go to the show first and the ones that did go to the show last. And this will help you from spreading something that was from the potentially exposed animals to the healthy ones that stayed at home. So you could potentially be the fomite just based off of your chore routine. So a few other things to do after the show once you get home. Don't use any of the equipment that you took to the show on animals that didn't go to the show until it's been properly cleaned and disinfected. Make sure you're watching those animals that went to the show over the next few days or so. Watch for any signs of illness. And it also doesn't hurt to visit with your veterinarian. Ask them for suggestions on more biosecurity practices that you can implement. They'll know your facility and your operation much better. So it never hurts to visit with them. Some of those signs of illness that you're going to be watching for, maybe you went out to do chores and you noticed that that animal did not clean up all of its feed. Maybe it has a lot of slobber or a cough, maybe some diarrhea, or even just a hard time breathing. These are all things that you need to be watching for right after a show. And I know it's really hard. You come home for a show, and for those of you that show spring shows, next weekend you might be headed back to another one. And it's really hard to give them that time and know for sure where you picked it up from. But we got to be on high alert for these things and be ready to get them treated as soon as we possibly can. So some protocol for cleaning and disinfecting. This is pretty standard protocol. First, you need to, remove all of the dirt and manure from the item that you're trying to clean. Wash it up with some soap and water. It doesn't have to be any kind of fancy soap, just dish soap is fine. Clean it up and, make sure you rinse it off really good and let it dry. Allowing it time to dry is very important. A lot of the viruses can't survive in the heat. So then once it's dry, you can apply a disinfectant and then let it soak or stand for about 10 or 15 minutes, rinse it off, and then let it dry again. So I'm going to kind of repeat this a little bit. The drying phase is the most important part. So wash that item, apply that disinfectant, rinse it off, and then just go put it out in the sun for a little bit and let it heat up a little bit. This will help kill ensure that a lot of the virus or whatever might have been on there has been killed. So some common disinfectants that could be used. Vircon's pretty popular, but the most popular one out there is something that usually everybody has on hand, and that's bleach. So put about 1 cup of bleach per gallon of water and mix it up. No matter what kind of disinfectant that you use, just make sure that no animal drinks this mixture. If you leave it in another container, be sure it's properly labeled, just so there's no confusion that this has a disinfectant in it. I share this image with you just as a reminder that, biosecurity is important. It's crucial to keep your livestock healthy. And this map shows where all the animals came from to attend the National Western Stock Show in Denver, Colorado. And this is why we have to have vet checks in place and why we need you to do your part at home to ensure that we can remain disease-free at these shows. I know showing is a team effort, but so is biosecurity. And this is the kind of map that keeps us up at night thinking about the risks that are involved here. So many different animals from so many different places all coming together in one location. It can be a very high risk. And that's something that we work hard to prevent. We try to educate people. That's why, CBIs and having a good relationship with your veterinarian, watching over your animals daily, making sure that they're healthy. If something doesn't appear to be healthy enough to make a trip to a show, leave them at home and let them get better. Biosecurity, I can't emphasize it enough. It's a team effort and we all have to pull our own weight on this one. So this is a risk assessment for biosecurity. It kind of helps you, it's kind of a decision-making tree a little bit, helps you decide, is this a low risk movement? Is this a high risk movement? Things like that. I think it serves as just a good reminder, we need to sometimes just take a step back and evaluate the risk. Sometimes that high risk item can keep us from showing, and we need to really keep that in mind. And so you can kind of see here, and I apologize, it's a little small, but contact of the public with your animals. Well, allowing the public to pet and feed your animals is a high risk. Protective clothing, not changing your shoes or your clothes after you've been to somebody else's barn and going back into your own, that's considered a high risk. It just kind of helps you think through some of the things that you might do day in and day out on ways that you can help protect your animals. And so lastly, I want to cover a premise identification number. I highly encourage you to get a PIN number. And this is a 7-digit code that's mixed with numbers and letters, and it's unique to the location that the livestock are raised at. The PIN is associated with the address, not so much the people. But this just allows us to know that there's livestock at that given address. If an outbreak was to occur, or maybe if your neighbor down the road had something come up, we would run a report in our office based on the address only. And if your address was in the system of having some livestock there, we would be in contact with you and letting you know that, hey, something's going on that you should be aware of. And that is all that we use this for. You're starting to see more and more shows require this. And so I wanted to introduce it to you if you haven't seen it before. In Kansas, you can find this on our website at agriculture.ks.gov/animal health. And it's just a basic form. This is probably the simplest form for the government you would ever fill out. You just contact information, your address, and what species you have. There is all that it asks for, and you send that in, and we will send you a 7-digit code just for that location. So with that, I just want to say thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Kelly. And now is your opportunity. If you all have questions, you can go ahead and put those in the chat, and we will have Kelly address those. As you're waiting, we'll just sit here and wait for you for just a minute. And as a reminder, if you don't mind, we'd like for you to please complete the survey located on the Kansas 4-H Animal Science page. That survey link will also be emailed to everyone, as well as the recording of tonight's presentation. We'll give everybody just a couple more minutes. Leslie, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Once again, we'd like to thank Kelly Oliver for sharing with us tonight. If you do have any questions for Kelly that you think of after the fact, we can be sure to get those to her for you. You can also find information on the Kansas Department of Ag's website. And you can always get extra information by reaching out to your local extension agent or also the Kansas 4-H office. And it looks like we don't have any questions, Kelly. So thank you so much. And we will see you guys next month. A reminder that this webinar series happens the fourth Monday of each month. We also have a 4-H equine webinar series that happens the third Monday of the month as well. All of the webinars are recorded and posted to the Kansas 4-H Animal Science page at the conclusion of the webinar. So with that, we'll let everybody go. We'll honor your time, and we want to thank you for joining us.